1897. Late summer. South Louisiana. By every known rule of survival, what happened next should not be possible. 6 men entered the Atchafalaya basin to cut cypress. They were not soldiers. They carried no banners, no backup, no way out once the water rose. They brought axes, rope, salt pork, and the certainty that men had been taking timber from this swamp for generations. Logic said this would end the way it always did. Trees felled, logs floated, wages paid. History insists it should have ended there. Instead, the swamp closed around them. The Atchafalaya was not empty wilderness. It was a living system designed to erase intruders. Water everywhere, ground nowhere. Cypress knees like broken bones. Channels that shifted overnight. Sound died quickly here. Voices did not carry. Gunshots did not echo. Even panic felt muted, swallowed by moss and humidity. Men who had survived river drives and sawmill accidents felt reduced to trespassers, walking on something that did not want them. The company records would later describe the job as routine. Mark trees, establish camp, begin cutting once the water dropped. But from the moment their skiff left the main river, the numbers were wrong. 6 men against hundreds of square miles of swamp. No road, no telegraph, no authority once the boat turned back. Guaranteed defeat, according to logic, does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it begins with silence. Within the first mile, the birds stopped calling. This was noted by the guide, a Creole man named Marcel, who had run these channels since childhood. He said nothing at first. Guides learn early that fear spreads faster than fire. But his posture changed. His shoulders tightened. His eyes stopped scanning the water and began tracking the trees. By every known rule of the wilderness, this was backwards. Water should be watched for gators. Trees should be background. Marcel did the opposite. They reached the intended camp by dusk. A patch of marginally higher ground ringed by cypress, barely enough to keep their boots dry. The men unloaded supplies while mosquitoes formed a living fog around their heads. Smoke from the cook fire rose straight up and vanished, as if the air itself were sealing over it. That night, something circled the camp. Not rushed, not clumsy. Slow steps, deliberate, keeping just beyond the firelight. No splashing, no branches breaking. By every known animal pattern, this movement made no sense. Deer fled. Bears crashed. Men blundered. This walked. They said nothing to each other. This was not bravery. It was arithmetic. 6 men. 1 sound. No clear target. No rational commander fires blindly into darkness with limited ammunition and no retreat. At dawn, they found tracks. They were not clean. The mud had slumped overnight, water seeping back into the impressions. But enough remained to cause disagreement. Too large for a man. Too narrow for a bear. Long heel. Deep toe. As if something heavy had stood upright and shifted its weight. By every known rule of tracking, the prints contradicted themselves. The owner, Dupree, dismissed it. He had invested too much to accept uncertainty. Overconfidence is not arrogance when it is necessary to proceed. It is a survival mechanism. He ordered the lines cut and the marks set. Work began. This was the critical decision. Axes rang through the swamp, sharp and metallic. With each strike, the men felt exposed, as if announcing their position. The silence did not lift, thickened. Even insects seemed to retreat. Sweat-soaked shirts within minutes. Hands blistered, muscles burned. Physical suffering is manageable when it has purpose. What erodes men is effort without feedback. No birds returning. No sound answering back. By midday, they realized they were being watched. Not in the way men imagine, no eyes gleaming from shadows. It was subtler, the sense of timing. When one man wandered from the group, the swamp seemed to lean toward him. When they clustered, the feeling eased. This is how predators think. This is how commanders think. Isolate. Pressure. Wait. That afternoon, the cook found the meat cache disturbed. No theft. No clear damage. Just rearranged. Pots turned. Salt spilled into water. A message without language. By every known rule of scavenging, this was wasteful. Animals take. They do not display. Marcel finally spoke. He told them the old word. Rougarou. Not a monster from stories told to children, but a warning embedded in culture. A name for something that punishes men who cross boundaries they do not understand. He did not describe it physically. That omission mattered. The more specific a threat becomes, the more manageable it feels. Marcel refused to give it shape. Dupree ordered him to stop. Superstition undermines command. This too is a rule of warfare. Night fell again. The circling returned, closer now. The steps paused at the edge of light. A smell entered the camp. Wet fur, rot, something coppery beneath it. One man retched. Another whispered a prayer. No one slept. At dawn, one man was gone. No struggle. No blood. His bedroll lay where he had slept. Boots beside it. By every known rule of disappearance, this was impossible. Men do not vanish barefoot into a swamp without leaving sign. Yet the ground was smooth, water lapping gently over erased evidence. History insists this should have ended the expedition. Instead, Dupree made his second decision. They would stay one more day, one more attempt to finish the line, one more chance to impose order on a place that had made its terms clear. By every known rule of survival, this was where logic failed completely. And the swamp, patient and methodical, prepared its response. August 1897. Third day inside the basin. By every known rule of leadership, this is where men retreat. One man gone. No evidence. No explanation. Supplies compromised. Morale fractured. The numbers now favored the swamp even more heavily than before. 5 men against an enemy that refused to show itself, in terrain designed to erase mistakes. History insists this should have ended with withdrawal. Instead, the camp remained. Dupree did not frame it as defiance. He framed it as necessity. The mill expected timber. Credit had already been extended. A retreat now would mean financial ruin. In frontier economies, debt was a quieter killer than any beast. He told the men that panic would only multiply danger. That whatever took their companion would not dare strike again in daylight. This was not irrational. It was worse. It was plausible. They ate little that morning. Hunger sharpens senses but weakens judgment. The men spread out to resume marking trees, each within shouting distance of the others. This was the compromise, progress without full exposure. By every known rule of small unit tactics, it was insufficient. Spacing without visibility creates isolation without safety. The swamp adjusted. Sound began to play tricks. Axes struck wood, but the echoes returned late, warped, arriving from directions that made no sense. A shout would travel 50 yards one moment and vanish at 10 the next. Men stopped calling out unless necessary. Silence became a defensive posture. Near midday, Baptiste slipped. Not dramatically, not into open water. His foot slid from a cypress knee slick with algae, twisting his ankle hard enough to drop him. Pain flared. He tried to stand and failed. Injury in hostile terrain is not just a physical problem. It is a countdown. They carried him back to camp on an improvised stretcher. Progress halted. Sweat poured. Tempers shortened. No one said it aloud, but the arithmetic was clear. An injured man changed everything. Speed reduced. Noise increased. Options narrowed. This was the moment the enemy pressed closer. Tracks appeared again near the edge of camp. Fresher now. Deeper. More defined. The men gathered around them, arguing quietly. Someone suggested a bear walking upright. Someone else said no animal leaves prints that clean. Marcel said nothing. He watched the tree line, fingers tight around his cross. By every known rule of folklore, naming a thing gives it power. By every known rule of fear, refusing to name it lets it grow. That afternoon, Dupree made his third decision. He ordered a perimeter cleared. Axes swung not to fell timber but to carve space. Branches were cut back. Sight lines opened. Firewood stacked high. A ring of light, he reasoned, would deny concealment. This is a classic human response to unseen threat. Expand visibility, assert dominance. The swamp responded by drying the air. Smoke no longer rose cleanly. It hung low, drifting sideways, stinging eyes, carrying scent far beyond the camp. Every fire is a signal. Every signal invites attention. The men did not consider this. They were thinking like occupants. The swamp thought like a besieger. At dusk the sounds changed. No steps this time. No circling. Instead, something vocalized from deep in the trees. Not a howl. Not a growl. A call that rose and fell, stretching syllables too long, bending pitch in ways that mimicked human distress without ever forming words. By every known rule of animal behavior, this was wrong. The injured man began to cry. Not loudly. Just a low, continuous sound. Pain, fear, fever beginning to set in. The others tried to quiet him, not out of cruelty but necessity. Noise attracts. Weakness invites testing. The call answered him. Closer now. From a different direction. As if something were triangulating the camp. No rational commander would allow this to continue without action. Dupree ordered warning shots fired into the trees. The reports were dull, swallowed by wet wood and heavy air. No return sound followed. The call stopped. For a moment they believed it had worked. That belief lasted exactly 1 hour. Near midnight, something struck the perimeter. Not a charge. A single impact. A log, thrown from the darkness, landing just beyond the firelight. It was heavy enough that no man there could have thrown it that far with that accuracy. By every known rule of physics, the force required exceeded what they wanted to accept. Panic surged and was forcibly contained. Men grabbed rifles, scanned shadows, fingers white on triggers. Nothing moved. No follow-up attack. Just the message, delivered and complete. You are surrounded. You are measured. You are not in control. At dawn, Baptiste was dead. Not from wounds inflicted in the night. Infection. Shock. Fever burning through a body already taxed by heat and fear. The men stood over him in silence, understanding the implication. The swamp had taken another without touching him. Attrition without engagement. Perfect strategy. They buried him shallowly. The ground resisted even this, water filling the grave faster than they could dig. When they finished, the mound already sagged, edges dissolving back into the basin. There would be no marker, no permanence. By sunset, it would be as if he had never been there. This broke something, not morale, that had been failing already. It broke the illusion that endurance alone would see them through. Endurance requires an endpoint. The swamp offered none. Marcel spoke again. He said they had crossed a line days ago, one marked not on maps but in memory. That the Rougarou was not hunting them for food. That it was correcting an imbalance. Punishing intrusion. He said leaving now might still be possible, but only if they moved immediately and together. Dupree hesitated. Leadership is often defined by decisiveness, but history is littered with moments where hesitation was the fatal flaw. He weighed loss against retreat, investment against lives, control against admission of error. While he calculated, the swamp acted. A scream tore through the trees to the east. Human. Distinct. Calling Dupree's name. It was the voice of the man who had vanished 2 nights before. By every known rule of death, this could not be happening. And yet, there it was, close enough to hear breath between words. One of the men took a step toward the sound. This was the next turning point, and it would cost them dearly. 1897. 4th night. The basin after dark. By every known rule of warfare, this is where discipline collapses. The scream came again, closer this time, clearer. It carried the cadence of pain men recognize instinctively. Breath hitching, throat strained raw. The voice did not shout randomly, called specific names. It knew the order in which men would respond. No rational commander allows pursuit under these conditions. Night, unknown terrain, an enemy capable of mimicry. Yet logic weakens when confronted with the possibility that a man thought dead might still be alive. Hope is a destabilizing force. Henri stepped forward before anyone could stop him. He had cooked for river crews for 20 years. He had seen men crushed by logs, pulled under by currents, bitten by snakes. He could not accept a death without a body. He took a lantern and a rifle and said he would go only far enough to confirm. This was not bravery. It was refusal. The light moved into the trees. The others followed at a distance, calling his name, trying to keep formation. The ground turned treacherous immediately. Roots like traps. Water hiding depth. The lantern swung, throwing shadows that leapt and distorted, making the forest appear to breathe. The voice stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. By every known rule of pursuit, this is the moment to withdraw. The men did not. They advanced another 50 yards. Another 100. The campfire glow vanished behind them. This was the mistake the swamp had been waiting for. The lantern went out. Not shattered. Not dropped. Snuffed, as if cupped by a hand. Darkness swallowed the group instantly. Men froze, afraid that movement would separate them further. Names were whispered. No one answered from the front. Then came the sound of dragging. Slow, wet, deliberate. Something heavy being pulled across mud and roots. Henri screamed once. Short, shocked, cut off mid-breath. By every known rule of human anatomy, the force required to silence a man that quickly is extreme. Panic surged and broke containment. Shots rang out in all directions. Muzzle flashes illuminated fragments of horror, tree trunks, hanging moss, splashes of disturbed water. No target. No return fire. When the echoes died, only breathing remained, ragged and uneven. They found Henry's rifle first. Bent. The barrel curved like soft metal. No teeth marks. No claw gouges. Just pressure. Applied slowly. Intentionally. This was not predation. This was demonstration. His body was never recovered. The men stumbled back toward where they believed camp to be, moving by instinct rather than direction. Time lost meaning. The swamp shifted underfoot, channels guiding them away from familiar ground. By dawn, they emerged into a clearing they did not recognize. They had been herded. By every known rule of terrain control, this was flawless execution. An enemy that never revealed itself had separated, disoriented, and reduced them further without sustaining a single visible loss. Only 3 men remained. Dupree, Marcel, Isaac. They did not speak. There was nothing left to negotiate between them. Isaac shook uncontrollably, hands raw from gripping his rifle too tightly through the night. Dupree's confidence had calcified into something brittle. Marcel looked older, as if the years he had spent avoiding this place had finally caught up to him all at once. The clearing held something new. A structure. Not a cabin. Not a camp. A lattice of branches woven together high in the trees, like a nest scaled for something far larger than any bird. Strips of cloth hung from it. Shirt sleeves, trouser legs, stained dark and stiff. Human remains repurposed as warning. By every known rule of anthropology, this suggested ritual. Marcel dropped to his knees. He said they had not just crossed a line. They had been selected. That the Rougarou did not kill indiscriminately. Tested. It measured fear. Punished hubris. He said leaving was no longer an option in the way men understood it. Survival now depended on appeasement. Dupree rejected this immediately. Appeasement requires submission. He had built his life on imposing order. He raised his rifle and fired into the structure, splintering branches, sending scraps of cloth drifting down like dead leaves. The shot echoed longer than any before, carrying far into the basin. The response was immediate. The water around the clearing began to move. Not churning, not splashing, rising. Channels that had been shallow hours before deepened rapidly, fed by unseen currents. The ground softened underfoot, boots sinking, suction pulling at ankles. By every known hydrological rule, this kind of change should take days, not minutes. Something moved beneath the surface. Not a single shape. Multiple disturbances, converging, as if the swamp itself were mobilizing. Isaac screamed and tried to run. He made it 3 steps before the water surged up around his waist and something struck him from below. He vanished in a burst of bubbles and red. Dupree fired until his rifle clicked empty. Marcel dragged him backward, shouting over the rising water. They fled into the trees, abandoning everything: food, weapons, reason. They ran until lungs burned and legs failed. When they finally collapsed, dawn was breaking again. Only 2 men remained. They did not stop running because they felt safe. They stopped because the swamp let them. Behind them, something howled, not in rage but in completion. By every known rule of survival, this should have been the end. It was not, because the swamp was not finished teaching its lesson. 1897. 5th day. Near the heart of the Atchafalaya. By every known rule of endurance, Dupree and Marcel should already be dead. They had no food, no ammunition, no bearings. Their bodies were wrecked, feet shredded by submerged roots, skin blistered and insect-bitten, mouths swollen from thirst they could not quench despite being surrounded by water. Sleep came in fragments measured in seconds, each one haunted by the certainty that stillness meant detection. Yet they were alive. History sometimes preserves men not out of mercy, but to ensure the story continues. Marcel believed this deeply. He said nothing as they moved, but every turn he took was deliberate. He avoided open water. He avoided high ground. He followed routes no map recorded, paths remembered through generations, used only in emergencies, designed to confuse anything that followed by scent or sound. Dupree followed because he had no alternative. By midday the howls returned. Not close, not distant, parallel, keeping pace. This was not pursuit in the animal sense. It was containment, a reminder that escape was being permitted, not achieved. By every known rule of hunting, this behavior is reserved for intelligent predators. They found a pirogue half-sunk in reeds late that afternoon. Old, cracked, abandoned long enough for algae to coat its sides. Marcel hesitated. Boats are promises. They also trap. But the water routes ahead narrowed toward the main river. Walking would take days they did not have. They pushed off. The paddle strokes were shallow, cautious. Each dip into the water felt like an invitation. The swamp closed in, cypress trunks forming walls, moss brushing their shoulders. The air grew colder, heavier, as if descending into a corridor rather than moving forward. The first strike came without warning. The boat lurched sideways, nearly capsizing. Something heavy slammed into the hull from below. The wood groaned. Dupree screamed and stabbed downward with his knife, hitting nothing. The water boiled briefly, then stilled. They did not stop paddling. By every known rule of fear response, this should have broken them. Instead, it clarified things. There would be no negotiation, no further testing. The lesson would end only when the swamp decided it had been learned. As dusk approached, they reached a wider channel. The current strengthened. This was the river's influence, faint but real. Civilization's pulse, still reaching into the basin. That is when Marcel slowed. He raised one hand and whispered a prayer in French and Choctaw, words older than the state itself. Dupree did not understand them, but he understood the posture, submission without surrender. From the trees it emerged, not fully, never fully, a shape taller than a man, hunched to pass between trunks, its outline wrong in subtle ways. Legs bent too far back, shoulders too broad, fur or hair slicked dark with water. Eyes reflected firelight that did not exist. It did not charge. It stood at the edge of the channel, watching. By every known rule of confrontation, this was the moment of final violence. Marcel spoke. He did not plead. He acknowledged. He named the intrusion, the cutting, the greed, the refusal to listen. He placed his cross into the water and let it sink. He offered memory instead of resistance. The shape tilted its head. Then it stepped back. The howls ceased. The water calmed. The pressure lifted like a held breath finally released. They paddled until their arms failed. When they reached the main river at dawn, fishermen found them collapsed in the boat, half dead and raving. Dupree would never return to the swamp. He sold his holdings at a loss and left the state within the year. Marcel vanished into the bayous, refusing all payment, all interviews. The official report listed the missing men as casualties of wilderness hazards. drowning, infection, disorientation. It was tidy, acceptable, but the timber line was never finished. Old families still tell the story differently. They say the Rougarou did not hunt the men because it was hungry. It hunted them because they refused to leave when warned. By every known rule of folklore, monsters are metaphors. By every known rule of history, metaphors do not leave bent rifles behind. Years later, the record after the silence. By every known rule of history, this is where the story should fade. No bodies recovered. No trial. No official inquiry beyond a few paragraphs filed in a parish office and forgotten beneath ledgers of timber and land sales. Events like this are supposed to dissolve into rumor. Unprovable. Uncomfortable. Easily dismissed. Instead, this one endured. Not because of what was said, but because of what changed. After 1897, cutters avoided that stretch of the basin. Not openly. Not by decree. They simply found reasons to work elsewhere. Equipment broke more often near those channels. Guides refused contracts without explanation. Camps established too close to the old line suffered accidents that made no sense. Ropes snapping under light load, trees falling against the cut, men waking to find their boots filled with swamp water though the ground was dry. By every known rule of probability, coincidence has limits. Dupree never spoke publicly about what happened. But letters survive, fragments written to creditors and family. The tone shifts abruptly after that summer. A man once obsessed with expansion begins writing about restraint, about knowing when land does not want to be owned. He warns younger partners against pushing too far into unsettled places, a phrase he never used before. He died early. Alcohol. Nightmares. No witnesses. Marcel's story traveled differently. He never told it straight through. He scattered pieces across decades, across kitchens and boats and quiet walks through flooded timber. He corrected details when others exaggerated. He refused drawings, refused measurements. He said that precision made it angry. The Rougarou, he insisted, was not a beast that wandered. It was a response. When asked why it appeared to some and not others, he gave the same answer every time. Because not everyone refuses the warning. By every known rule of storytelling, this should be moralized. Turned into a lesson. A fable about greed or superstition. But the people who heard Marcel speak noticed something else. He never described the creature killing for pleasure. Never glorified fear. He spoke the way veterans speak about ambushes, flat, restrained, focused on sequence rather than spectacle. Because the horror was not the attack. The horror was how methodical it was. Years later, in the 1930s, a survey crew attempted to reopen the old line with modern equipment. Steel tools, motors, radios. Within a week, they abandoned the project. Officially, it was flooding. Unofficially, men reported hearing voices over the water that matched dead co-workers. One swore he saw a figure standing upright in waist-deep current, unmoving, watching. No photos were taken. The radio logs cut out mid-transmission. By every known rule of skepticism, these accounts are unreliable. And yet, the timber still stands. The cypress there grows older each year, untouched. Moss thickens. Water deepens. The swamp does not erase the memory of intrusion. Catalogs it. This is why the story persists. Not because it promises terror, but because it suggests limits. That some places enforce them, that progress is not always advancement, that history does not belong solely to those who write it down, but also to the land that absorbs the cost. In 1897, 6 men entered the Atchafalaya believing survival was a matter of skill and will. The swamp taught them otherwise. By every known rule of logic, they should not have been hunted with such precision. By every known rule of history, they should have been forgotten. They were not, because the Rougarou was never the monster. It was the boundary, and boundaries, once crossed, do not always forgive.